boys and girls. Last week we talked about how Nana took the 13 grandchildren to Mars and they got to play with the five toads. And we had such a great time, and we came back home and they went home and all that good stuff. And I said, I'd see what happens this week. Well, you know what? Yesterday I heard a noise scratching on my bedroom window. And I looked out the bedroom window kind of sneaky like, because I didn't want, if it was somebody, I didn't want them to see me. I just kind of peeked out the blind a little bit, and there was a Mr. Toad and a big green blob, and they were just pecking on the window. And I'm like, what are they doing that for? They're supposed to come to the front door. So I kind of opened the blind a little bit more, and I said, come around to my front door. And so they went, okay. And so in a little bit they rang the doorbell. Well, Mr. Toad didn't ring the doorbell. The big green blob rang the doorbell because Mr. Toad, you know, he's a little short and he might have a little trouble ringing the doorbell. Although, I don't know, Mrs. Toad rings it when she comes to visit, so they must climb up the wall. Oh boy, do you know that toads can climb up walls? Well, yes, of course you know that. Well, anyway, I don't really know who rang the doorbell except for that I think Mr. Big Green Blob did. Anyway, I opened the door and I looked at him and I said, hey, what are you here for? Because it's a surprise and you didn't call me ahead of time, and I'm kind of really busy right now. I'm sorry to say, but I'm kind of really busy right now. And they said, well, what are you busy doing, Nana? And I said, well, I'm busy cooking dinner because everybody's going to come over and eat dinner tonight. And they said, oh, we showed up at the right time. We can come in and help. I went, wait a minute. And then I thought, well, I better be nice. So I went, well, I really could, well, I really don't need your help today because I've got it under control. I'm making chicken and dumplings and homemade biscuits, and I've done it for 1,000,000 years, and I don't think I need your help. And Mr. Toad and Big Green Blob looked at me and they just got all disappointed. And Big Green Blob, he said, Nana, the dumplings sound delicious and so do the biscuits, and we don't know how to cook that stuff. Would you teach us how? And I'm like thinking in my head, oh man, I could sure do it a lot faster if they didn't come in. And then I thought, well, maybe I should be nice and let them in. So I looked at him and I said, okay, come on in. And I'm thinking, I wish that they had not come. Do you ever have that happen, boys and girls? You know, somebody shows up at your door and you open it and there's somebody to visit, and you're not even dressed, or you're in the middle of something and you wish they hadn't come. And it's kind of hard to know what to do. But I decided to be nice, and so I let them come in, and I brought them in the kitchen, and I put them in a couple chairs, and I said, so just sit here and watch. And they went, well, we can sit and watch, but we wanted to help. And I said, I'm thinking in my head, Big Green Blob's hands on my biscuits, and Mr. Toad's hands and feet in my chicken and dumplings. That just sort of grossed me out, y'all. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And so I said, well, you know what? You'll have to go to my bathroom and wash your hands and your feet really good, because if you hop on my biscuits with your feet, Mr. Toad, I'm going to be really upset because your feet are kind of dirty. And so he went in, and actually he decided to get a bath in the bathtub. He said, oh, Nana, you have a bathtub. We don't have bathtubs in Mars. I went, you don't? Do you ever get baths up there? And they said, well, we hop up under the waterfalls. I went, waterfalls in Mars? And they said, well, yeah, sometimes we have waterfalls in Mars. They kind of go away once in a while because it's kind of hot up there. And I said, oh, okay, kind of dries up. And they said, yeah, well, y'all. So I decided, well, if they don't have a shower, if they don't have a tub, well, I guess I'll let them get in the bathtub. So Mr. Toad hopped in and he washed his hands and feet. Mr. Big Green Blob, he tried to get in the tub, but let me tell you, he's pretty tall and his head was about to touch the ceiling. So he said, I'm just going to wash my hands. So he washed his hands in the sink, and they came back out to the kitchen. And I said, okay, now that you're clean, here's what you do. And I started showing them how to roll the dough, and then how to roll it out, and then cut it and all that good stuff. And they were doing a pretty good job. And so then I said, okay, now we've already cooked it. I already had cooked the chicken. So they went ahead and they put the dumplings in the chicken broth. And then we waited a little bit till the dumplings started getting a little bit bigger. And then we added the chicken meat back in. And all of a sudden the doorbell rang and all the grandkids started coming for dinner. And the big green blob and the toad were still there. And I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do? I hadn't planned on them eating here too. And they said, well, Nana, your kids are showing up and we better go home. And I said, well, I tell you what, I'll send a little bit home with you and you can let Mrs. Toad taste them. And they said, oh, she'll love it. And so I gave them a little bit to take home. And then they left. And the grandkids came in and they went, Nana, who was that? Because they just saw him leaving. They couldn't tell who it was, although it was in a spaceship. So they knew it had to be somebody from Mars. And I said, well, Mr. Toad and Big Green Blob showed up and they wanted to help me make the chicken and dumplings and the biscuits. And then all of a sudden, Leah and Claire and Gemma, the girls, and Anne Marie, they said, Nana, did they wash their hands and feet? And I said, oh, yeah, I made sure they did. And they said, phew, I hope that the dumplings and biscuits taste the same. And I said, oh, I think it does because I already snitched a little. And so they sat down and ate their chicken and dumplings and their biscuits and they went, yum, 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 yum. They rubbed their tummies and went, this is delicious, Nana. And then I got a phone call, ring, ring. And on the other end is Mrs. Toad. And she said, Nana, thank you so much for sending the biscuits and the chicken and dumplings. It was delicious. I loved it. And I said, well, good. Did your kids like it too? And she said, well, it wasn't quite enough because you didn't send enough. And I went, oops. And then she said, but I tried to give them enough to at least taste it. And my littlest one got kind of feeling crummy after eating it. And I went, oh, that's too bad. And she said, well, we're not used to eating chicken. We don't really usually eat chicken. I said, you don't? And she said, no. And so I had to give the littlest one a little medicine for its tummy because it was feeling a little bit puny. And I said, well, I'm sorry. I hope it feels better tomorrow. And she said, oh, he already feels better. And I said, well, good. And so I said, well, Mrs. Toad, if you want to know how to make chicken and dumplings and biscuits, you can come back someday and I'll teach you how. And she said, oh, I would love it because even though we don't eat chicken, I could put worms in it instead. Oh, I said, worms? She said, oh, Nana, that's what we put in our soup. And I said, you put worms in your soup? That's just a little gross, Mrs. Toad. And she said, well, we think it's gross to put chicken in your dumplings. And I said, oh, well, I guess that would be that way. I reckon that makes sense. And she said, well, Nana, anyway, I just wanted to call and tell you that it was delicious, but I'm not going to be cooking chicken because I don't like to catch chickens and then have to eat them. I don't know about that. And I said, well, that's fine with me because I don't like to go out and pick worms and put them in my soup either. So you know what, boys and girls? Different strokes for different folks. And that means that everybody has their own way of doing things. And we just have to understand that people are different. They might not always do things the way we like to do it. And that's okay because they probably don't want to do it like our way either. So we have to understand that people and frogs and toads and worms and big green blob and everybody has their own way of doing things, okay? All right, boys and girls, hope you enjoyed that story. I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.